There we go. All right, so welcome. This is the Narrating History, Home, and Diaspora Critical Essays on Edwidge Danticat panel for American Literature Association. And this was organized by the Edwidge Danticat Society and my two lovely colleagues, Joanna Davis-McElligatt and Maia Butler. So I'll go ahead and read through each of our bios. So Maia Butler is an assistant professor of African American literature at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. She's also an affiliate faculty in Women's and Gender Studies and Africana Studies. She is a literary geographer researching and teaching an African American diasporic, Anglophone, post-colonial, and American studies with an emphasis on Black women's literature and feminist theories. My other colleague and editor, Joanna Davis-McElligatt, is an assistant professor of Black literary and cultural studies in the Department of English at the University of North Texas. She's co-editor of Narratives of Marginalized Identities in Higher Ed, Inside and Outside the Academy, Narrating History, Home, and Diaspora, Critical Essays on Edwidge Danticat, and Boom, Splat, Comics and Violence. She's currently at work on her first monograph entitled Black and Immigrant Belonging, Diaspora, and Time in American Literature After 1965, a critical exploration of representations of immigrants of African descent to the US, from Afropolitans to Wakandan Americans. We are also joined today by three of our contributors to the collection. I will introduce, starting with Gwen. Gwen Bergner is an associate professor of English at West Virginia University. She's the author of Taboo Subjects, co-editor with Zita Nunez of the special issue of American Literature titled The Plantation, the Post-Plantation, and the Afterlives of Slavery, and articles on race, US imperialism, and transnational feminism in PIMLA, American Quarterly, excuse me, American Literary History, among others. We're joined by Tammy Jenkins. She received her doctorate degree in curriculum and instruction from Louisiana State University. Her research interests are gender studies, Black Atlantic studies, and African American history. Recent publications include Reading, Singing, and Viewing Rape, Uncovering Hidden Messages of Womanhood and Manhood in Popular Culture, Rewriting the Black Female Body, or Cleansing Her Soul, Narratives of Generational Traumas and Healing, and excuse me, in Edwidge Danticat's Breath, Eyes, Memory, and Culture, Identity, and Otherness, an analysis of Kino songs in John Steinbeck's The Pearl, and Palat's Melody in Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. Last but not least, Isabel Caldera is Associate Professor of American Studies at the Faculty of Letters and Senior Research Fellow of the Center for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra, Portugal. Her research fields are African American studies, comparative studies of the African diaspora, inter-American studies, post-colonial and feminist studies. Her recent publications include Reclaiming Voices and Bodies of the Nobodies, The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action, excuse me, Inter-American Perspectives in the 21st Century, Black Women Writers in the Americas, The Struggle for Human Rights in the Context of Coloniality, and Liquid Grave or Route to Freedom, Edwidge Danticat's Children of the Sea. Thank you all so very much for being here today. As we mentioned, this is part of the Edwidge Danticat Society. This was an organization Maia and myself co-founded as bright-eyed graduate students. We quickly brought Joe into the mix and out of the society that really was designed to foster the scholarship on Edwidge Danticat and just really bring her to national international prominence for her prolific body of work. And out of that society came the collection. So I will pass the mic to Maia.
Thank you for those great introductions. Yes, my name is Maia Butler, and as a co-founder of the Danticat Society with Megan, it has been just a really fun ride. Megan and I met, she actually accepted my paper to her panel, Sustaining Home in Diaspora, in 2015 at SAMLA in Atlanta. So I think of SAMLA as just a special place that, you know, it's one of the conferences that I go to often. I feel like it's so warm to graduate students and undergraduate researchers as well. I've actually brought my grad and undergrad students to present there, and they've had really engaging and kind of formative experiences. And yeah, so it was where Megan and I met and started discussing the Danticat Society. And as we put the society together, we found, you know, some of the you know, most committed and energetic folks around Danticat's work, hence like bringing in Joe, and started to have some really good papers at SAMLA, at ALA. At this conference, we've had really good ones. And it's just allowed us to continue to have these ebbing and flowing conversations around Danticat's work with other interested folks who are interested in, you know, in presenting at these conferences on the panels with us. And so in 2017, we had just an amazing outpouring of abstracts around these themes of history, home, storytelling, narration. You know, people really wanted to write about these issues and speak to the ways that Danticat contends with them in her literature. And so at SAMLA 2017, we had 2 panels with the Danticat Society, and each panel had 4 papers, and the audience was huge and so engaged. I mean, it was just like a back-to-back Danticat love fest and just really deep, enriching conversations. And after that day, we were like, you know, this has to be an edited collection. And so we sort of revised and re-released, you know, the CFP to invite more papers, and again, received such an overwhelming response. I remember the difficulty of just narrowing down, y'all, like who, you know, and so we feel like we had, and we have such an amazing array of, you know, authors who are academics, who are independent scholars, who are, you know, writing from various locations and write about Danticat from, you know, their various disciplinary backgrounds. So the collection has taken several years to get into this point that we're now in press, and it's like it's finished and just being, you know, finalized. A lot of things happened along the way. I had a serious chronic family illness and took family medical leave. Megan and Joe both received different positions and moved respectively, like across the country, you know, for their new jobs. And, you know, the pandemic happened, and, you know, political instability in some of the home countries of some of our authors, like in Chile and things like that. So I am just so grateful that we have remained, you know, all together and all still collaborating and cooperating to see this to fruition. And it's just like a baby being born, you know. I hope that's an okay metaphor. I'm, you know, I'm a mother. And so, yeah, so it's amazing. So you can find out more about what the society does at Edwidge Danticat Society.org. And we'll also be posting more about the book coming into print and the estimated date that it will be in the catalog for University of Mississippi Press is August 22. So yeah, at this point, we're there's just all the final stages and things. So it's just amazing. And I'm just grateful. I'm so glad that we could gather here today and that some of us are seeing each other for the first time via Zoom. Just interesting the ways that the pandemic has distanced us, but also brought us closer in some ways. So exciting. All right.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and start with Gwen. title of the chapter, Lot Bodlo and the Spatial Relations of Diaspora.
Well, it's so nice to see everybody, and thank you so much, Maia, Megan, and Joe, if I can abbreviate, sounds like you go by Joe. Thank you so much for all of your hard work organizing the collection as well as this panel, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this community and to meet you all and my the other contributors and panelists for spending some time on this summer afternoon, and I'm very grateful, and I thank you. In my paper, which is taken from the chapter, I'm putting together Danticat's book of essays on the craft of writing, Create Dangerously, with her collection of short stories on migration, The Dewbreaker. And in Create Dangerously, Danticat attests that writing and reading have been dangerous practices for Haitians under the Duvalier dictatorships and subsequent authoritarian regimes. And she says that this reality drives her effort to create dangerously for those who have sacrificed so that she has this voice. And among those who have sacrificed, she names victims of Haitian political violence, migrants exiled from the homeland, and she considers it an exile for anybody who has to be away from Haiti, relatives who are left behind in Haiti, and ancestors who have paved the way. And in Creating Dangerously, Danticat animates the voices of these dead and exiled through an aesthetic practice that is informed by Haitian traditions, such as one she describes in which family members call the spirits of their dead relations from en bas de l'eau, or under the water, so that they may be reborn to occupy the landscape, the trees, the rocks, the grottos of Haiti. And in this essay, I explore how she enacts these aesthetic practices, these traditions, in her migration story cycle, The Dewbreaker, in order also to animate the spirits of the ancestors and to recall the voices of the migrants in the Haitian diaspora, to keep them close. And specifically, I use the Creole phrase or concept l'autre bord de l'eau, which means on the other side of the water, as a key to understanding her aesthetic practices in The Dewbreaker. And l'autre bord de l'eau is a vernacular expression that is used to refer both to the ancestors who are across the Atlantic in Guinea or Africa, right? Where, according to Haitian tradition, dating from colonial slavery, it says they return after death. And that phrase, l'autre bord de l'eau, is also used to refer to Haitian migrants who are located across the Caribbean in the US and Canada. So the phrase connects the dead and the exiled and locates them both in relation to the Haitian homeland and also to its traditions of Vodou and its post-colonial history. In this way, the phrase encapsulates the spatial relation between Haiti and the Haitian diaspora, a dynamic that is further inflected by the temporal relation between Haiti's post-colonial present and its colonial past. So I want to think about the ways that l'autre bord de l'eau, on the other side of the water, is a kind of spatial and temporal metaphor, although I want to say it's more than a metaphor, right? Because it talks about real places, real sort of geographic spaces where these groups of people are. Sorry, I lost my track for a second. So I want to suggest that the concept l'autre bord de l'eau, on the other side of the water, describes a simultaneous connection and separation across time and space. And it helps us make sense of the Dewbreaker's spatial jumps between Haiti and the US, and also its fragmented narrative structure. So in other words, Danticat represents the simultaneous spatial and temporal disconnection, that dis and connection between the ancestors and the living, and between the rooted and rooted Haitians, in both sense of the words of root. And in this way, she uses an aesthetics informed by Haiti's material landscape and spiritual ethos to create an epistemic perspective on migration. In exploring Danticat's mediations among history, home, and nation through the portal of Lot Baudelot, I heed recent calls from post-colonial critics to pay greater attention to environment and geography. Lot Baudelot infuses what has become an overgeneralized notion of diaspora with historic, geographic, and cultural specificity. Originating in the cross-cultural contact occasioned by Atlantic slavery and repurposed for contemporary patterns of migration, Lot Baudelot encapsulates a transnational history in the vernacular. It also counterbalances the critical tendency to celebrate mobility, hybridity, and cosmopolitanism of the global migrant at the expense of the emplaced resident, because it locates the migrant from the resident Haitian's viewpoint across the water from the homeland, therefore defining diasporic identity in relation to the homeland rather than as deracinated cosmopolitanism. It further evokes the geographic features of island and ocean, both of which are crucial to the critical project of remapping the world as a series of culturally interlinked islands joined by ocean waters. This view of a terraqueous or archipelagic globe of repeating islands, to use the terms of recent theorists, decenters continental land masses and equalizes the islands of the global south, conventionally seen as peripheral to modernity in the global north. Locating the ancestors in Guinea and the migrants in North America in relation to Haiti's island geography and post-colonial temporality, Lot Baudelot references Haitians' terraqueous or archipelagic worldview, which Danticat translates to English and transposes to US literature. Lot Baudelot also resonates with the Caribbean concept of tidalectics. A term coined by Kamal Brathwaite, tidalectics refers to the repeating and mutually informing dynamic between land and sea, waves and shore. This dynamic contests Western ideas of linearity and progress, instead emphasizing time as ebb and flow, place as flux and motion, and history as repetition rather than teleology. The nonlinear rhythms of tidalectics helps us make sense of the Dewbreakers' formal structure, its assemblage of, quote, fragmented, fictionalized testimonies, and, quote, of state violence under the Duvalier dictators, and its kaleidoscope of diasporic subjectivities and its lack of narrative structure. So those are all the things that have been said about the short story collection that make it kind of difficult for interpretation. In this light, the seemingly tangential connections among stories and characters indicates the global forces that shape transnational migration, considering that Haiti's centuries of slow violence in the forms of genocide, slavery, economic exploitation, occupation, dictatorships, environmental degradation, and epidemics, considering that they erupt into US visibility only during peaks of political unrest or natural disaster, as we have just seen in the last couple of days, the Dewbreakers' decidedly unspectacular, even detached tone counters this crisis mode and resists the sentimentality and political moralizing, that's a quote, that is sometimes substituted for narrative drama. The Dewbreakers' tidalectic rhythms merge Haiti's island environment, Vodou traditions, and decolonial history into an epistemic perspective on migration. We see this restorative literary landscape in the Dewbreakers' tidalectic structure that recounts the disconnections of diaspora through metaphors of water. And so, for example, looking at a few stories in the collection, in the first one titled The Book of the Dead, the eponymous Dewbreaker, a Duvalierist torturer now seeking to bury his past, sinks his daughter's sculpture of him in a stagnant and man-made Florida lake, thereby inverting the process of commemoration, of calling the ancestors from the waters. In the story 7, a wife gulps glasses of water as if to drink up the distance between herself and her husband, a distance that was first geographic when he migrated to the US for work and left her behind in Haiti for 7 years, and that is later, after their reunion in New York, emotional distance. In the story Water Child, a solitary woman in Brooklyn, separated from her parents in Haiti and unable to form lasting relationships in the US, memorializes her aborted child and foreclosed future by placing a pebble in a glass of tap water, an approximation of a Japanese shrine where water was poured over altars of stone to honor unborn children. This aqueous language is more than symbolic. Water here signals how migration dislocates the exile from Haiti's material environment, which is the repository of family memory and national history. And water also houses the spirits of the ancestors and the exiles, indicating how the material environment shapes the experience of home and migration. Before turning to just one example of a story from the Dewbreaker, I want to explain a bit further the materiality of history embedded in the Creole expression Lot Bodlo. Lot Bodlo names a paradoxical connection and disconnection that arises from the migratory patterns of cross-cultural contact of Haiti's history of Atlantic slavery. In Vodou tradition, the dead make this voyage to Guinan, to the waters of the abyss below the earth that hold the island below the sea where they reside. These waters are the source of all life, the home of the Loas and the location of Guinan, and the repository of cosmic memory and wisdom. The living access this spiritual realm through the crossroads, the point of intersection between the horizontal plane of material earth and the vertical plane of the heavenly and watery cosmos. Because of this communication between the intersecting worlds, the ancestors' spirits remain accessible to the living for the purposes of care and healing. Thus, Lot Bodlo indicates how the ancestors and the living are simultaneously disconnected and connected by water. Haitian practices of Vodou mediate these dislocating effects of history to maintain a connection between the ancestors and the living. In this way, the phrase Lot Bodlo indicates an ethos and a practice of invoking the past to affect the present. And like the ancestors, Haitian émigrés are also imagined as geographically linked to the homeland through a floating island, which is known as the 10th department. This is, Danticat talks about this in Create Dangerously. As she explains, Haiti had 9 geographic departments, and the 10th was the floating homeland, the ideological one, which joined all Haitians living outside of Haiti in the diaspora. And just as a note, of course, I guess the Haiti proper now has a 10th department. So the diaspora would have to be an 11th department. But at the time Danticat was writing, it had 9 departments. So like the ancestors' island below the sea, the floating ideological island of the diaspora extends Haiti's geographic territory, linking Haitians on both sides of the water. So, and finally, now I want to connect Danticat's discussion of the aesthetic practices of Vodou and her own writing from Create Dangerously to her writing in the Dewbreaker through a brief discussion of the first story in the collection, The Book of the Dead. In Create Dangerously, Danticat explains that Haitians use the arts of Vodou to memorialize and animate the ancestors, and she compares these practices to those of ancient Egyptians who memorialized the dead through tomb paintings, hieroglyphic texts, and sarcophagi. And these representations, she writes, not only usher the dead into the next world, but also keep things alive. And Danticat writes that as an immigrant artist, she also wants to keep things alive by creating, quote, as though each piece of art were a stand-in for a life, a soul, a future. In this way, she connects her own aesthetic practice to the Haitian Vodou traditions and to the aesthetic and spiritual practices of ancient Egypt. And interestingly, Danticat makes a similar connection between immigrant art and ancient Egyptian memorials in The Book of the Dead, which is this first story from the Dewbreaker. The story's title refers to the ancient Egyptian funerary text of that same name, The Book of the Dead, which is defined as a loose collection of stories told by many voices that assists the dead through the underworld and into the afterlife. And I want to say that the short story collection, The Dewbreaker, is doing the same thing. It's also an assemblage of voices whereby Danticat is trying to usher the voiceless migrants and also those lost to political violence into a kind of afterlife in exile. The comparison suggests that the immigrant artist, the ancient Egyptian sculptor, or the Haitian who serves the spirits, that they all create such an assemblage that keeps things alive, using memory and history to shape the present. In addition, the story, The Book of the Dead, concerns an immigrant artist's struggle to keep alive the spirit of an exile, thereby providing a kind of fictional parallel to the craft essays in Create Dangerously. And in this first story, the narrator Ka, who was born in New York to Haitian parents, struggles to memorialize her father, though he is still alive, by sculpting him in wood. In her story, she tries to capture this, quote, quiet and distant man who only came alive while viewing the ancient Egyptian artifacts of mourning in the Brooklyn Museum. The ancient Egyptians remind him of Haitians because they worshiped their gods in many forms, fought among themselves, and were often ruled by foreigners. That's a quote. Ka attempts to memorialize her father by sculpting him the way she had imagined him as a political prisoner in Haiti. As a second-generation immigrant, she approaches her emotionally distant father by recreating in sculpture his traumatic experience in Haiti, a place she has never been. In this way, her art stands in for the man who died in Haiti and who flickers to life only when he views the Egyptian memorials that live on in the Brooklyn Museum. And so Ka's sculpture, in a way, figures Danticat's own artistic project of memorializing the dead and exiled to sustain the living. In this story, Ka and her father are driving through South Florida on their way to deliver the sculpture to a buyer. But along the way, Ka learns that she is mistaken about her father's past. He is not a former political prisoner, but actually a renowned former torturer of the Tanta Makut. And for this reason, her father sinks the sculpture into a man-made lake, quote, one of those marvels of the modern tropical city with curved stone benches surrounding a stagnant body of water, quite different from the watery characteristics in the Haitian landscape. Ka learns that she, in sculpting him, has been trying to keep alive not a political hero, but a man responsible for others' deaths. In sinking the sculpture below the stagnant waters of the man-made lake, Danticat ironically inverts the Vodou ceremony that calls the ancestors' spirits from beneath the waters. In this way, she suggests the pitfalls of the immigrant artist's project to keep things alive. For the gaps of time, space, and history cannot be seamlessly crossed. Ka must now bear the weight of her father's atrocities, even as he credits her and her mother with redeeming him. So the immigrant artist lives this contradiction between nostalgic love for the untenable homeland and a kind of guilty afterlife in safe exile. From this ambivalent place, Danticat herself creates dangerously, recognizing, as does Ka, that she bears an ethical responsibility to animate through art the souls of the ancestors and the exiles for the purposes of care and healing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gwen. All right, our next paper will be Tammy Jenkins, Intertextually Weaving a Home Place, Viewing the Past as Present in Breath, Eyes, Memory, and Untwine.
Hi, first I want to thank Megan and Joe and Maia for including me in your book and on this panel. I greatly appreciate it. My paper that I'm going to present is an abbreviation of the essay that's in the book, if that's okay. It starts, for centuries, Black writers have been searching for ways to document the lived experiences of their ancestors. They have engaged in a variety of academic forums, such as diasporic studies, genealogy, cultural studies, and analytical narrative inquiry, to create alternative interpretations for past events using a present-day lens. These talented writers developed their works to bear witness to the lived experiences of their ancestors, as well as those of other diasporic people. In this tradition, Edwidge Danticat writes stories synchronized with her understandings of her ancestral and acquired narratives. A prolific writer and intellectual, Danticat draws on situated knowledge and factual evidence as sources of inspiration in her novels. Speaking textually with the embedded voice of her family and community, Danticat's texts portray the diasporic experiences of Black people, particularly women, in the New World. This is significant because Black women's voices and experiences have often been ostracized in mainstream literary offerings. Following the conventions established by her historical and literary forebearers in Breath, Eyes, Memory, and Untwine, Danticat writes stories that are intermingled with her understanding of Haitian culture, social narratives, and family traditions. These novels include Danicat's blending of her situated knowledge with factual events in Haitian folklore to create female characters who are traumatized and empowered, and sometimes they're traumatized and empowered simultaneously. In my essay, I use Breath, Eyes, Memory, and Untwine to investigate how she syncretizes these themes in her work. And from Breath, Eyes, and Memory, I focus on the Cacao family. And from Untwine, I focus on the Broyer family. From Breath, Eyes, Memory, I use Grandma Ife and Martine. And from the Untwine, I use the twins, Giselle and Isabel. Viewing Breath, Eyes, Memory, and Untwine as story texts containing factual occurrences, I consider Danicat's language use, word choices, accepted meaning, and reappropriated meaning through her characters. In the case of Grandma Ife, Martine, Giselle, and Isabel, Danticat uses these characters to present readers with literary expressions of Black diasporic people desire to learn their history, like for me, those who don't know their complete histories, share memories, and construct a self-defined identity. From these books, I pull relevant excerpts and references and consider how Danticat connects her characters to their ancestral past while rewriting their present and create their new identity. Then under the section that I call Past, Present, and Intertextuality, I look at the acts of how Danticat uses the act of rewriting the past as a present-day discourse and an approach to her literary works from which intertextuality provides a foundation for her retellings of past, present, and future events using facts and fiction. The inclusion of the fictionalized narratives and techniques derived from oral storytelling, like in the Haitian voodoo tradition, a lot of their laws are repeated as stories, passed from one generation to the next, with each generation adding to the mysticism. Oral storytelling by Black authors is not a new phenomenon, but it has been a vehicle that has been used to pass on generational knowledge and preserve their culture and their social artifacts. The mixing of historical events or figures with fictionalized interpretation is a technique that Danticat uses in both Breath, Eyes, and Memories, as well as Untwine. She uses this to enable her characters to express and negotiate a different set of cultural expectations while trying to reconcile the differences between the two, as illustrated in the relationships between Grandma Ife and Martine, and how they both reflect the story of Martine's sexual assault by the Tutan Macoute. Using myth and Haitian history, Danticat recreates stories of the Tutan Macoute and Uncle Gunnysack. Uncle Gunnysack is a boogeyman whose legend is exploited as a cautionary tale to frighten disobedient, unruly children. In a fictionalized version of the Tutan Macoute, they're described as scarecrow with human flesh, who brutally murder and devour the flesh of children. However, the tale becomes reality during the presidencies of Francois Papa Doc Duvalier and his son, Baby Doc, Claude Duvalier. When their private militia that he called the Tutan Macoute were assembled to maintain law and order on the island. The Tutan Macoute under the Duvaliers were an all-male battalion who wore overalls, dark sunglasses, and straw hats as a representation of the fabled namesake, which was Uncle Gunnysack. And some people would say that it's one of the Loas, Dumbala. Duvaliers Tucumcau were glorified criminals who murdered, tortured, robbed, physically abused, and sexually assaulted residents of Haiti, specifically those residing in rural areas. After a nearly 30-year reign, the Tucumcau was disbanded, but their existence and horrifying lore remain part of the history, culture, and narratives of the island. In Untwine, Danticat kind of veer away from the Tucumcau, and she goes more towards the Haitian voodoo pantheon. She presents the Boyer family, specifically identical twins, Giselle and Isabel, to explore Haitian culture and social narratives. The twins are a representation of the Loas who are known as the Marasas, which are intertwined twins, for lack of a better word. It shows that on the way to a after-school event, the Boyer family gets into a car wreck, and one of the twins died, but the other one still internalizes the deceased twin. So she doesn't let her sister mentally die; she just let her physically die. If that makes sense. What she remembers is that they were born holding hands, and when the car accident happened, they were holding hands again. So she remembers holding her sister's hand, and she realizes that from the moment of birth to the moment of her sister's death, that they were always intertwined. Now her goal in life is to become untwined, to learn how to live without her twin. The use of these historical and cultural references enable Danticat characters to convey overlapping, multiplicitous narratives to the reader simultaneously as one continuously retelling of a single event or story. Featuring nostalgia as a form of intertextuality and Untwine, Danticat incorporates the Haitian voodoo laws, specifically the Marasa, to represent the shared history of experience that exists between Giselle and Isabel. Like her literary counterparts in Breath, Eye, and Memory and Untwine, Danticat employs intertextuality to methodologically place Haitian culture and social narratives in the stories of her characters and share those with her readers. Additionally, Danticat interpolates fragmentation to reappropriate language and accepted meaning in both texts in ways that enable her characters to articulate their narratives of lived experiences while connecting their stories to their ancestral past, family customs, and spiritual heritage. And we see that in Breath, Eye, and Memory when Martine is reunited with her daughter Sophie, who was conceived from her sexual assault. During Martine's stay in Haiti, she has nightmares where she relived the moment of her sexual assault, and she has the same nightmares when she re-encounters her daughter. Martine states that whenever she's here, and that means back home in Haiti, I feel like I sleep with ghosts. She's constantly haunted by her past, and she doesn't know how to get over her trauma. Because not only was she traumatized by the sexual assault, she was also traumatized by her community reaction to her unwed, unplanned pregnancy following the assault. So those are the ghosts that she sleeps with when she returns home. These narratives emerge through her dreams and are reinforced by her memories in Haiti and New York. But unlike Martine, Giselle's memory of Isabel doesn't manifest in night terrors, but a combination of fantasy and reality where she blends together to future cast what her sister would say and do in different instances that she encounters personally. So Giselle would say, well, if Isabel was here, she would do ABC versus XYZ. Readers are never formally introduced to Isabel. We only see Isabel in the car riding before the accident. But once the accident occurs, we just hear her name and references to her, but she was never fleshed out completely as a character in the story. In her dreams, Giselle situates Isabel's existence in the past before moving to her present. For example, she imagines Isabel lived in the Egyptian civilization and that she would have been an inspiration to like Queen Nefertiti. In ancient Greece, she would have been a muse. But she never completely lets go of her sister. She constantly reinvents the memory. So throughout Giselle's monologues, Danticat endows Isabel with attributes reserved for spiritual figures such as being a muse or a goddess, as well as a member of the royal family, like a lady in waiting for Queen Nefertiti. From Giselle's description, Isabel is reimagined as an inspirational person with a charismatic personality who makes those around her feel as if they're in the presence of greatness or in the presence of the divine. This is presented in breath-eyed memory and entwined in ways that Danticat resituates her characters' narratives between Haiti and the United States. Although in breath-eyed memory, Sophia grew up in Haiti until she was 12. Then she went to New York to live with her mother. But when her mother passed, they both traveled back to Haiti for the burial. Whereas in Untwine, the Giselle and Isabel parents were from Haiti, but they grew up in the United States. But they had their family around them who had immigrated from Haiti to be close. They were all in Florida. Using locatedness, Danticat uproots and transplants Haitian culture and social narratives as constructive critiques of the world in her narratives. For example, she uses naming a lot. So she named Grandma Ife. And that's a name that's commonly associated with the kingdom of Ife, which is in Yoruban city that's in present-day Nigeria. And I love how she plays with the names of her characters. Grandma Ife was the wise woman. She would be like the connection to the ancestors. She carried all the family history and her stories that she would share with her granddaughters and her daughter. So she would, to me, it's like the seed of knowledge that Danticat uses to maintain her footing in her real world experiences and her ancestral past. And I conclude with breath eyes and memory and Untwine. Danticat uses post-memories in the form of dreams, fantasies, and or storytelling to recreate her characters' narratives in ways that deconstruct and reconstruct their lived experiences from multiple points of view. In breath eyes and memory and Untwine, Danticat introduced intertextuality as reimagined accounts of actual events resituated as fictionalized interpretations that are passed down as cautionary tales or expository narratives of lived experiences from one generation to the next. So I think her overall goal when she writes is for us to see new and different things every time we read the same text. At least that's how I read her stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tammie.
You're welcome.
All right. Last but not least, we have Isabel presenting Edwidge Danticat, The Ethics of Disobedient Writing.
Uh-oh, Isabel, you're still on mute.
Sorry. So okay. I want to thank you for all the good work, all the effort to put together the book. And I'm very proud to be part of this as well. And thank you for also letting me hear and be part of this conversation. So yes, I, in this paper, I analyze Danticat's work as a form of ethical response to the other, the subaltern, in defense of the rights of freedom, citizenship, against the oblivion of historical memory, and the abuses of power. Sorry, my voice is not so good today as Megan's. Thus, writing is disobedient of any authority that excludes and oppresses what I call the ethics of disobedience. Having chosen in her work to address many of the troubles faced by Haitians throughout history, Danticat pays utmost attention to devalued people and shows a constant self-questioning as it relates to the truth in an attempt to voice their hardships. And also, as she says, to answer a call that is related to responsibility. And I quote her, "The only thing writers can do in those types of situations is, if they choose, to add their voices to those others who bear witness to that type of violence, those types of crimes, that kind of injustice." In her texts, I see a concern first to balance interdiction as the state's policies of exclusion with interchange. And I play with the word interdiction for articulating this in inter with hyphen interdiction, expressing a willingness to overcome conflict and difference, to be able to find hope in togetherness. The text I use to work this notion is Creating Dangerously, and one of the stories included in Creek Crack, Children of the Sea. And second, to balance scars with bridges. I borrow her own words when she comments on the divisions between Dominicans and Haitians. And I quote, "Often in the dialogue, we bring up our historical scars, but not our historical bridges." The text I use to work this notion is The Farming of Bones. I describe Danticat's position as one of an interposer, relating to the idea of, and I quote her, "looking for that in-between place." The sense of being caught between the two worlds, Haiti and US, and the hundreds of thousands of Haitians in the diaspora, and torn between three languages, Creole, French, and English. But she's also deeply aware of her location as an insider-outsider. When she received the MacArthur Genius Award a few months before the earthquake in Haiti in January 2010, besides using that money to help her people, she felt a double responsibility as a writer and as an Haitian, what she calls her immigrant work ethic. Danticat often writes about dissidents against dictatorship in Haiti and the boldness that it requires, as she does in Create Dangerously. She starts the book with a story of disobedience that resulted in a death penalty. She recalls the execution by the Papadox regime of two young men who had joined Jeune Haiti to fight against Duvalier dictatorship. Their story, she says, haunts her like a creation myth. The descent, the self-exile, the return, the guerrilla war, and the ultimate self-sacrifice for the freedom of the nation. It reminds her of the Adam and Eve creation myth, as both stories involve disobedience, defiance of authority, and the consequent punishment and prescription. In the juxtaposition of the biblical parable with the historical episode of her Haiti, Danticat reveals her ethical posture as a storyteller, to use the symbolic power of words to confront power and authority, reclaim the memory of facts, and thus fight against the oblivion of history. And I quote her, "Reading like writing under these conditions is disobedience to a directive, in which the reader, our Eve, already knows the possible consequences of eating that apple, but takes a bold bite anyway." She reminds us that it was Eve and not Adam who dared to disobey. In fact, women are represented by her as most daring in their fight for freedom and self-determination. And mind the reader impersonating Eve. I'll come back to this notion in the end. In Danticat's interpretation of this event, disobedience defines our humanity, although it may cost us banishment, exclusion, ultimately death. Hence, human beings betray their true nature when they exchange conformity for safety. The ones who are not willing to conform still resist through dissent. As a consequence, they may be punished or interdicted in the sense of being persecuted, excluded, or othered. In Children of the Sea, I found a thematic elaboration of the meaning of interdiction as prescription, outlawing, that plays with interdiction, with an hyphen, in the sense of interchange. So the imagined exchange of letters between the two young lovers that structure the narrative. I underline that these letters are dead letters because they never reach the addressee. Therefore, the active interdicere only works between writer and reader, which accentuates the interdiction imposed by the dictatorship and that forced the separation of the two young lovers. It is only at the fictional level, through the meanings conveyed through the imagined dialogue between the young man and the young woman, that interdiction is ultimately subverted and resignified. Interdiction becomes interdiction. The writer puts herself in position of interposer to pass on this message to the reader. The novel, The Farming of Bones, is also a good example of the representation of authority and interdiction that subjects the most vulnerable people and their indelible capacity to dream. Danticat's choice of the biblical passage from the book of Judges for the epigraph of The Farming of Bones is especially significant as it refers to the killings of the Ephraim by the men of Gilead, who also used identification through the pronunciation of a word, in this case, Shibboleth. This parallel may emphasize a transversal and transhistorical discrimination of the other, reinforced by political propaganda targeting any so-called threat against the security of a nation. The novel refers to the Operation Cabezas Haitianas, ordered by Power Mad Generalissimo Trujillo. It was the interdiction imposed on a group just because of their Haitian origin, even on those who had already been born on the Dominican side of the island. It is worth recalling that Trujillo was himself mixed blood, but wanted to hide this fact. After all, he represented a white Creole bourgeoisie that had accessed power in the wake of Spanish decolonization and based that same power on a claim for white ancestry. Haitians were othered for their blackness, and the massacre was justified as a de-Africanization of the country. Haitians tried to escape and cross the Massacre River, the river that divides the two countries. Dominican soldiers shouted, "Perejil," perish, punish. Creole-speaking Haitians were supposedly targeted by the way they were incapable of pronouncing the word parsley as the Spanish-speaking Dominicans did. However, the name given to the river, Massacre River, refers not to this tragic episode, the 1937 massacre under Trujillo, but to a former massacre, the battle between French and Spanish colonizers in their fight for dominion of the island. In this way, the history of violence for possession and exclusion, division and hate, silencing of different cultures, languages, which so well describes colonialism, is reenacted by subsequent powers that perpetuate the logic of racial and ethnic discrimination and racial division of labor. So the water of the river was twice tainted with blood. Amabel Désir, the protagonist narrator of the novel, is dark-skinned Haitian, survived the crossing of Massacre River when she was still a small child. However, her parents didn't. She became a domestic worker in the Dominican Republic, working for Senora Valencia. It is Amabel who refers to cane life, the source of employment for most Haitians at the time, as the farming of bones. Because after harvest, the cane stalks resemble bones. Brutal cane-field work also left inscriptions written on the flesh of the migrants, for us to read the text of neocolonial exploitation. Father Romain, the Haitian priest and community leader, comments on the name of the town, Alegria, where this part of the narrative takes place, saying, "Alegria, a name to evoke joy. Perhaps there had been joy for them in finding that sugar could be made from blood." So the destiny for man in the novel is also buried in the river waters with the persecution of Haitians. But Amabel is again a survivor, the one who must overcome to be able to retain the story in her memory or tell it as Ishmael or the sailor in The Ancient Mariner. The dedication of the novel, not signed by the author, as expected, but by her character, and I quote, "In confidence to you, Maître, Mother of the Rivers, Amabel Désir," may also be read as an expression of resistance. To open the book with the protagonist's utterance of faith and confidence in the Mother of the Rivers appeals to the superiority of a spiritual order over the musings of earthly powers and celebrates the spiritual empowerment of the 18 characters. The bodies may be scarred, tortured, killed, but Danticat's characters still find dignity in their spirit and their mind to resist. In the most eloquent and empathic passage of the novel, Odette, the Haitian woman who tries to escape the Dominican Republic alongside Amabel and a group of other evacuees, is dying after this dramatic crossing of the river. Her voice of resistance and disobedience is sounded, but barely heard. And I have to quote, "With her parting breath, she mouthed in Creole, 'Bessie,' not calmly and slowly as she were asking for it at the roadside garden or open market, not questioning as if demanding of the face of heaven the greater meaning of senseless acts. No effort to say Perihili as if pleading for her life." This text implies a creative reading of the act of disobedience, first enacted by the writer, then filtered to Amabel. She says, Amabel, and these are Amabel's words, "The Generalissimo's mind was surely as dark as death. But if he had heard Odette's Bessie, it might have startled him, not the tears and supplications he would have expected, no shriek from unbound fear, but a provocation, a challenge, a dare. To the devil with your world, your grass, your wind, your water, your hair, your air, your words. You ask for Perihili, I give you more." So when Amabel decides to visit Alegria in the Dominican Republic years after the massacre, what strikes her are the new signs of interdiction, evident on the barbed wire atop the poles stuck along the border, high walls fortifying houses, and a climate of fear. But what she observes at the border balances interdiction with interchange. Although Dominican armed soldiers mark the presence of authority, the living people of the river, as a quote, though haunted by gory history, still lie, sometimes peacefully, sometimes uneasily, side by side. And parsley is present both in the most common and the most significant activities of everyday life, in whatever language or diction. Amabel is entitled to give us her testimonial, the one she had denied the authorities. But the note of wisdom, a final note of wisdom when she says, "Only when Millie and Sebastian were taken did I realize that the river of blood might come to my doorstep, that it had always been in our house, that it is in all our houses." This note of wisdom is followed by a crucial message by the end of the novel. The imbalance of power distribution may be too tough to fight against, but human beings still resist, if not with weapons, then with words. And I quote, "It is perhaps the great discomfort of those trying to silence the world to discover that we have voices sealed inside our heads, voices that with each passing day grow even louder than the clamor of the world outside." Firstly, the writer, then the fictional voices she creates, lastly, her readers. Remember, the reader as disobedient Eve, all build a community of interposers who speak truth to power by learning to disobey, not stay indifferent, because the river of blood might come to my doorstep, but it has always been in our house, that it is in all our houses. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Isabel. All right, I want to thank all of our panelists, and we've come up with a few questions. I will go ahead and read those, and then I'm going to pass it over to Joe, who's going to facilitate this session. We had a few, we were thinking about the relationship between each of the chapters and some of the major themes, and we came up with the following. Number one, how does our work in this edited collection frame Danticat as an essential voice in contemporary society? Specifically, how does her activist and public intellectual work impact her fiction and nonfiction writing and vice versa? Number two, how and in what way does her perspective as an immigrant/writer nuance understandings of home, space, diaspora, and disobedience? And number three, in what way does genre and readership matter in terms of her work as a writer? For example, does her fiction address or complicate issues located in her body of work in the New Yorker? And I'll go ahead and I'll cut and paste these in the chat box as well.
I just did that.
Oh, thanks, Joe.
Yeah, I thought maybe we could start with the second question. How and in what way does Danticat's perspective as an immigrant nuance or provide nuance, shade, impact? Not only how she understands home, space, diaspora, and disobedience, but then also how we make sense of that. Anybody want to take a chunk? Take a little knuckle.
When I read her work, I found that her insider outsider perspective, because she was a Haitian immigrant coming to the United States, learning to speak English, learning our customs and trying to balance it between Americanness, I guess you can call it that, and her Haitian roots. So I found that her ability to put herself inside and outside of the conversations within her text and her activism has a greater impact on the messaging that she's presenting.
Yeah, I like the way she frames that in Create Dangerously, but also in a Brother, I'm Dying. The difficulty she has in providing things for her family. They're asking her things that she can't get them, but then also simultaneously recognizing the privilege she has living in the US, like economic privilege specifically.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I think, especially when she brings up that her own family calls her blonde, right? The use of the frame to sort of silence her in some ways. I think what's really neat about her work is she speaks truth. I like how you said shade. She's very honest about how complicated her position is as a writer, but also how privileged it is.
Yeah, Bharati Mukherjee wrote an essay I really like about what she calls the literature of new arrival. And that's her term, right, for a new generation of American immigrant literature. So she says, you know, like the prior generation, the immigrant literature was all about assimilation. And she says this new generation of immigrant writers, you know, don't follow that same path of assimilation, and they don't leave behind their allegiance to the country of origin. And she takes Danticat as her primary example of this. And she also talks about how a lot of these writers are talking about violence and trauma in the homeland. And then also when I was doing research for a different piece about transnationalism, you know, I was interested to find that even in research in other disciplines like sociology and stuff on transnationalism, they took Haitian immigrants to the United States as, you know, sort of like originating the idea of transnationalism, where you don't let go of allegiance to the country of origin, even as you develop a relationship to the destination country, but you continue to go back and forth. And so I feel like Danticat has been, you know, so important and a key in developing that idea of transnationalism in literature and how you kind of maintain this relationship to the country of origin you know, even as you're undergoing the immigrant experience. And I think, you know, that's a kind of obedience and disobedience, you know, and I think that your point, Megan, about her being called blanc by her own family. It's like, well, if you leave, you're automatically disobedient, but you're also disobedient to your new home by not becoming fully American in a sense and retaining your attachment, you know, to Haiti. So you're forever in between in a way, as Tammy was saying also. So I think she always writes from the, you know, the ethical place of that in-betweenness of trying to maintain the ethics to both sides, to pick up Isabel's word of ethics.
I also appreciate her constant self-questioning when she refuses to be the voice of Haiti, of the Haitians. And she's very careful, and really the self-question is very honest. And I really appreciate it because she feels responsibility, of course, from her location of privilege, but at the same time, she does not want to be representative.
Right? It makes me wonder, you know, what y'all think about the function of nation. You know, this collection was originally History, Home, and Nation, but then as we, you know, got closer to completing it, it seemed like Diaspora was closer to what she's talking about, and sort of nuance that we're describing here. So it makes me wonder what y'all think about the construction of the nation, not just Haiti, but then Danticat's relationship to the US as well.
Something that I think about a lot and talk about with my students in classes and write a little bit about in some of my publications on Danticat is that I think her work allows us to think about America as more expansive, so that it's not synonymous with the USA, but remembering that Haiti is also an American location. She extends our South into the global South, you know, with thinking about how she has an abundance of homes in Haiti, in Miami, in New York. And she writes about the very many ways that our United States is so very, the history and the present are so very entwined with that of Haiti, and just inextricably so. And that we have a deep relationship with Haiti. And that's something that my students are always very kind of surprised that they didn't learn about in high school, and then their other college classes and that sort of thing. And of course, now we're like on the edge of our seats to see what's going to happen with Moises' assassination and you know, what that means for the possibility of our continued you know, interference with their political processes. But just, so I think that she shows us that America is not as exceptional and is not as insular and is not as separate from other nations in the Americas, as I think sometimes, you know, it likes to think of itself, or we in the kind of public imaginary, public recollection like to think of it, that nations really can be so much more deeply interrelated. Thinking about what Isabel had written about interdiction and interchange, right? Thinking about like the way that the borders between us and our others are really much more porous, you know, that we like to think. So I think that, yeah, and maybe I won't really arrive at like a final thought, but when I think about nation and what Danticat teaches us about it, I think a lot about those things.
But at the same time, I think, I agree with you, but at the same time, I think that when she speaks from the point of view of the writer, and the writer as the one who intervenes through words and through a vision of the world, when she uses the words, I remember in an interview in 2014. Contact, compassion, and critical solidarity. I like these three concepts to characterize her positioning. And but at the same time, she never forgets the colonized side and the colonized side. Even when she does not forget how the United States colonized Haiti and the heritage that also spreads from there.
Yeah, that makes me go back to Joe's question about nation, and I think, and I think everyone sort of spoke to this, but she's continuously drawing us back to the understanding of the sort of colonizing imperative of found in nation, and and I think that's important work. I think that's something that she struggled with and tried to sort of tease out in all of her work. And it's interesting now to, we're years into this collection, and to see, like how Gwen said, well, now it's, the floating homeland would be the 11th department. The way in which sort of these terms that are, so definitive of nations are changing as we see her work sort of evolve and develop.
I was thinking along those lines too, that nation would be more fluid and selective to really speak to the intertextuality that I put in my essay, how we just pull bits and pieces and sew it together, and it's constantly evolving because we're constantly learning and creating new things. So I think in Danticat's work, her notion of nation extends beyond your geographical location, because everything and nothing can be a nation.
I agree with everything that everyone said. And I also think, one thing that comes through in her writing is how much she loves Haiti, and how important Haiti is as a nation, and the sense of Haiti as a nation, right? And that created out of, slave revolt and becoming, independent. And I think about, Michel Trujillo's book, State versus Nation, right? And I think, it's always, of course, in the US press that Haiti is a failed state, which is kind of gets conflated with a failed nation, right? And I think that she wants to recover the people's nation, right? That is that repository of family and memory and the spirituality, and it's so connected to the land and the spirit of the people, and to animate that, right, as opposed to the state, right, the political state, while not forgetting the effects of the political state. And that's the thing that, people not in Haiti never see about Haiti, right? And so I think that's one of her gifts.
Absolutely. Let's go to the third one. In what ways does genre and readership matter? One of the things I'm struck by is her talking about the radio so much, and Create Dangerously, all of the various ways in which she, or film, right, visual art, journalism, children's literature, young adult fiction, the novel, poems, essays, memoir. I guess you could call Brother I'm Dying somewhat of a biography, right? The question goes on to, does her fiction address or complicate issues located in her body of work on the New Yorker? But I guess what I'm curious about is what we make of a writer whose oeuvre is so expansive. It's been one of the, I think, a challenge in this, collection, not just expansive, but then super prolific, right? We thought that we'd covered everything, but then everything inside came out, right at the very end, right? So I'm just wondering what y'all think about, the expansive, sort of prolific Danticat, where we would place her, and her importance, especially now.
Yeah, she's for me a writer as citizen. She cannot put apart right being a citizen in all its complexity and being a writer. That's why she's all over.
It does seem to
Yeah.
speak to, maybe in some ways, like the, complexity of her identity. All of these different modes of storytelling seem to offer a multiplicity of perspectives on this experience. Maybe like she, never, maybe all of them together or combined provides a sense of this experience more than, a single genre could do.
I think her writing style is more like bell hooks, where she tried to appeal to a variety of individuals, because bell hooks always say don't put it in a box, because she'll never stay in it. And I think that Danica's work speaks to that, to where she's not boxed into any specific genre, but yet a lot of people that I've spoken with have experienced her work in different ways. So I think having that expansive media outreach brings her to the attention of more people that she would be able to reach if she was in one specific genre.
Yeah, and kind of building on that, I think she has, she says that she is the voice for so many people, right? And she's like the only Haitian American who, is that well known, right? And has that visibility. And she's just trying, I don't know how she does it, right? It's just, she's tireless and she's everywhere at once. And she's just trying so hard to reach that audience, as Tammie says, and be a voice in, that's just, voice is a kind of a metaphor, right? But in so many different media and genres.
I'm wondering what this is of central interest to me in my book. My book project, I'm interested in the relationship between Black people and Black immigrants. So what do we do with Danticat in the sort of era of Black Lives Matter? How is Danticat's work speaking to a sort of proliferative understanding of Blackness and Black life in the US that's not always bound to this conception of being native born or having descendants in the contiguous, 48 or in the southern, southern states? Where do we see Danticat's readership going in the era of Black Lives Matter?
Megan and I have a piece in a book called Revisiting the Elegy in the Black Lives Matter Era. And our piece is called Danticat's Elegiac Project, her historiography of transnational US imperialist violence. And we say in that chapter that Danticat's work helps make true the founders of Black Lives Matter's assertion that it's a global movement. And we talk about her work in the New Yorker. We triangulate that with her memoir and with her, I think, her children's novel and her activism. Megan, do you maybe want to say a little bit more about like how we see her connecting?
Yeah, I think she's really nuancing sort of Black experiences from this sort of transnational perspective, specifically anti-Blackness and violence, right? And in the one op editorial we're looking at where enough is enough, right? The other one where she's making sense of police brutality from the perspective of a Haitian immigrant, a Black immigrant from Haiti. She's grappling in a way that you can see she's trying to wrap her head around, like, okay, how do I draw this connection between US imperial violence in the United States in the same way it's enacted on Black bodies in the US itself, right? And how do I make sense of it as someone who is Black and immigrant? And she sort of does that in that one op editorial. She's tracing, as a child, when I first came to this country, I experienced this. And then she's connecting, police violence against young Black males to violence, committed at the hand of the state, extrajudicial violence. And so you really just see her grappling and thinking through the complexity of it, and really trying to, what you said, Maia, draw that connection to, I don't want to say transnational, but the sort of transborder like legacy of anti-Blackness and violence.
Yeah, for her growing up in Haiti and witnessing state violence, through, we backed their dictators, right? And so when Tonton Maku were coming through the neighborhoods, right, or violence that happened, certainly even from like the UN, right, like the good folks, right, who were there to help them and who were there to save and that sort of thing. And so witnessing that arm of the US reaching into Haiti through state apparatuses like that, and enacting violence on that community, and then coming into New York, and then Amadou Diallo being killed by the police, and her experience protesting with the rest of the city, around that, and discussing Michael Brown and, all these things, just really just connecting those dots for us. It's just something that she does so beautifully.
Yeah, and she pushes back on this, like this, and she says like this narrative of that, like, if you're a good immigrant, it'll save you, right? Like if you follow your P's and Q's, like you will be free of violence in this country. And she blows that idea up immediately.
There's also the kind of violence, that attends the refugee experience, the violence of like the public health system, and getting caught up in the sort of an immigration trap. It's a very common, in my research, very, very common story. Being denied available help, because you're Black.
Yeah.
I guess we have time for one more, right? This ends at 2:30. So I guess we can talk, maybe everybody can talk about their contributions. How does this edited collection, or how your work on this edited collection, frame Danticat as an essential voice? And maybe you could speak a little bit about what you think about, Danticat's, contributions, why she matters, not just in her activism, public intellectual work, but her fiction and nonfiction writing. And sometimes those are pitted against one another, right? Fiction, that especially, at least maybe in literary studies fields, that the activist work is sort of takes this backseat to the published work. So maybe if everybody could just like go through, we could start with Tammie, then Isabel, then Gwen, and then maybe Maia, Megan, and I can finish by talking about what we were envisioning for this. But how do you see your chapter, contributing to really placing Danticat as an important writer for our time right now?
I see her work, because I used the intertextuality theory. So I see her work fitting into the genre that was established already, like with Toni Morrison and Toni Cade Bambara, speaking to the Black women and men lived experiences as so-called native-born Black Americans. And I see her adding the immigrant voice to these discourses, and then massaging it out a little more by showing the complexities of her lived experiences growing up in Haiti, then coming to the United States, and then going from what she may have not been called, all Haitians are considered Black, but then you come to the United States and you learn that Black have multiple meanings that extends beyond your skin color. So I think that's what she adds to the conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay, may I? I hope my chapter may put in forefront her use of language as the possibility that is open to her to fight for a better world, in a sense, to fight for the rights of citizenship. And borrowing from Gwen when she spoke of the global south, this notion that I think her involvement with this rights, with a sense of justice, connected to the sense that there are many people always on the other side of the line, on the other side of the water, as Gwen was saying. I think it's most important in our time that is so devoid of that justice and equality and rights of citizenship.
I guess I find Danticat's work is so complex, it's so hard to sum up. And certainly my contribution to the collection can only do, a tiny bit of, cover a tiny bit of what she does. But I guess some of the main things I try to bring out are the ways that her aesthetic practices are political, and that the aesthetic practices are based on Haitian culture and Haitian aesthetic practices and spiritual practices that really aren't separate from life, right? It's not like art is over here and then real life is somewhere else. It's all together in Haiti, in Haitian culture. And that she also shows that by using this very Haiti-based aesthetic practice, her writing about migration and transnationalism is both specific to Haiti, but also she shows that it's universal, right? She's always, connecting it to other cultures, so that instead of essentializing it or marginalizing it, she's showing how Haiti is both specific, but also representative, right, in a way to center it and to demarginalize it. So I guess that's where I would leave it.
Maia and Megan, do y'all want to, either one of you want to talk about what we were envisioning here?
Let's see, the previous Danticat Reader, edited by Martin Monroe, was published, if I'm not mistaken, in 2010 or 2011. And of course, 7 years later, she had written so much more. And if I'm not mistaken, I think one of the things that we early on thought that our reader could do differently from that one, not only did we want to add, consideration of her more recent works, but we wanted to add consideration of other sort of genres, and especially we haven't read a lot and seen a lot, at that time that we were thinking about what's going to make our book unique, about her anthologizing work. What does it mean that she is the anthologist of, 2011 America's best, short stories, America's best essays, and other things like that, and her documentaries and things. We wanted to do more work to bring all of the various genres that she's working in together in conversation with each other. So I think that's one thing, to just underscore just the broad impact of her work.
Yeah. I would just add to that, I think just being astounded by just how prolific she continues to be, and she was at the time, and just wanting to give credit where credit was due. She was doing this really transformative work in terms of literature, in terms of political thinking and intellectualism, in a very accessible way. And I think, for the three of us, there was this huge impulse to engage in that and bring attention to that.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I think it's at 2:30.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so very much. This was an absolute delight. As we've said, this project has been a labor of love. I will make sure everyone has access to the recording. And we will be reaching out soon with more opportunities as our book goes to print.
Woohoo, yay.
Yeah.
I can't wait.
Thank
It's
you.
too long.
Mhm. Mhm.
Read all those wonderful chapters. So thank you so much again and again and again.
Absolutely. Thank you. Be well, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye all.
Take care, y'all.
Bye.